The blood trail in the snow led Yates Sullivan straight to the woman collapsed against the pine tree with a newborn baby clutched to her chest, both of them blue-lipped and dying in the Wyoming blizzard that had been raging for 3 days straight across his land. He did not hesitate, though every instinct told him the situation was impossible, that they should already be dead, that nothing living could survive what they had endured. Yates dropped to his knees in the snow beside them, his heavy coat immediately covered in fresh powder as the wind screamed through the mountains like something wild and angry. The woman's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, meeting his, and in that brief second he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life, a mixture of desperation and fierce protective love that transcended words or reason. "I have you now," he said, though he doubted she could hear him over the storm. "Both of you." He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around the woman and child together, then lifted them as carefully as he could manage. The woman was small, delicate even, but the dead weight of unconsciousness made her difficult to carry. The baby, miraculously, made a weak sound against her chest. Yates felt his heart leap at that tiny noise. Life, still fighting. The walk back to his cabin took 20 minutes that felt like hours. His arms burned with effort, his face went numb from cold, and twice he nearly lost his footing in snowdrifts that came up past his knees. But Yates Sullivan had been ranching in these mountains since he was 18 years old, and at 26 he knew these lands better than he knew his own reflection. Even blind, he could have found his way home. The cabin appeared through the white curtain of snow like salvation itself. Yates kicked the door open and stumbled inside, immediately moving toward the fireplace where embers still glowed from the morning's fire. He laid the woman and baby on the bearskin rug as gently as he could, then set about building up the flames. Within minutes, the fire roared, casting orange light and blessed heat into the small space. Only then did Yates truly look at what he had found. The woman was young, probably around 22 or 23, with dark blonde hair matted with ice and blood. Her dress, what remained of it, was torn and stained. Her hands were wrapped around the baby with such fierce determination that even unconscious she would not let go. The child, so small it could not have been born more than hours ago, was wrapped in what looked like pieces of the woman's petticoat and a man's shirt, both inadequate for the cold, but clearly all she had. Yates moved quickly, gathering every blanket he owned. He knew about hypothermia from losing cattle in bad winters, knew that warming had to be gradual or the body would go into shock. He heated water on the stove, found clean cloths, and very gently began to work. First, he wrapped the baby in dry flannel, rubbing the tiny limbs carefully to encourage circulation. The child was a boy, he realized, perfect and small and impossibly fragile. As warmth returned, the baby's cries grew stronger. Good. Crying meant breathing, meant fighting. The woman was more complicated. Yates had to carefully pry her frozen fingers from around her child, whispering apologies as he did. He removed the wet, frozen clothing as modestly as he could manage, trying not to look more than necessary, trying to preserve what dignity she had left. There was so much blood. Too much. He knew enough about birthing, from helping cows and horses over the years, to understand that something had gone wrong. She needed a doctor, but the nearest town was 15 miles away and the blizzard showed no signs of stopping. So Yates did what he could. He cleaned the wounds as best he knew how, packed them with clean cloth, and wrapped her in warm blankets. He heated broth, and when she remained unconscious, managed to get small amounts between her lips, encouraging her body to swallow by instinct. He fed the baby sugar water from his finger, having nothing else to offer, and prayed it would be enough. Through the rest of that day and into the night, Yates kept vigil. He kept the fire roaring, kept watch over their breathing, kept the baby warm against his own chest when the child grew restless. Somewhere around midnight, the wind finally began to die down. By dawn, the blizzard had passed. leaving the world buried in 3 feet of fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds under the weak winter sun. The woman woke slowly as morning light filtered through the cabin windows. Yates, dozing in his chair with the baby nestled in a basket of blankets beside him, jerked awake at her sharp intake of breath. "Your son is alive," he said immediately, understanding that would be her first concern. "He is right here. He is safe." Her eyes, he noticed now that they were open and aware, were the color of winter sage, that pale green-gray that grew on the mountainsides. They filled with tears as she looked toward the basket, tried to sit up, and failed. "Do not move too quickly," Yates said, rising to bring the basket closer. "You have lost a lot of blood. You need to rest." "My baby," she whispered, her voice raw and broken. "Let me see him." Yates lifted the sleeping infant carefully and placed him in her arms. The woman clutched her son to her chest and wept, great gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Yates looked away, giving her what privacy he could in the small space. "Where am I?" she finally asked when the tears subsided. "My cabin. About 10 miles north of Weaverville, Wyoming. I found you in the woods yesterday during the storm." He paused. "I am Yates Sullivan. This is my land." "Beatrice," she said softly. "Beatrice Zimmer. And this is Samuel." She looked down at her son with such love that Yates felt something twist in his chest. "I thought we were going to die. What happened to you? How did you end up out there alone?" Her face closed down immediately, fear replacing the brief softness. "I cannot tell you that. Miss Zimmer, I need to know if someone is looking for you, if you're in danger." "No one is looking for me," she said with absolute certainty. "No one will come." The way she said it made Yates think there was more to that story, but he did not push. Instead, he said, "You need food, real food, and the baby needs milk. I have a cow. I can manage that at least." Over the next few days, a careful routine developed. Yates milked Bessie twice daily and heated the milk to body temperature for Samuel, who drank eagerly from a bottle fashioned from a leather glove with a tiny hole cut in one finger. It was crude, but it worked. Beatrice recovered slowly, her body fighting through fever and infection that Yates combated with willow bark tea and constant vigilance. He slept in the chair those first nights, giving her the bed, ready to wake at any sound. As she grew stronger, Beatrice began to talk more. Small things at first. She had grown up in Ohio. She loved reading, though she had not held a book in months. She had always wanted to see the mountains, and now, she said with dark humor, she had certainly seen them. But about how she came to be alone in a blizzard, 9 months pregnant and fleeing something or someone, she remained silent. Yates did not push. He had his own secrets, his own reasons for living alone on a mountain with only cattle and horses for company. A week after he found her, Beatrice was strong enough to sit at the table for meals. Yates made venison stew, the meat tender from long cooking, and watched as she ate with an appetite that pleased him. Good. She needed to rebuild her strength. "I owe you my life," she said suddenly, looking up at him across the rough wooden table. "Both our lives. I do not know how I can ever repay that debt." "There is no debt," Yates said firmly. "Any decent person would have done the same." "But not everyone would have done it well. You have been kind, gentle, respectful." Her eyes welled up again. "After everything, I did not expect kindness from anyone, especially not a man." There was so much pain in those words that Yates felt his jaw tighten. He had suspected from the beginning that someone had hurt her. Now he was certain. "You are safe here," he said quietly, "for as long as you need." Something in her expression shifted then, a crack in the armor she had built around herself. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you needed help." "It cannot be that simple." "Why not?" Yates leaned back in his chair, studying her. "My mother died when I was 12. My father drank himself to death 2 years later. I was taken in by a neighbor, old Frank Morrison, who taught me everything about ranching and never asked for anything in return. He just helped because I needed help. When he died, he left me this land and his cattle, said every person deserves a chance to build something good. He paused. So yes, it is that simple. You needed help, I could give it. Nothing more complicated than that. Beatrice looked down at Samuel sleeping peacefully in her arms, then back at Yates. I was married, she said softly, to a man named Robert Harlan. We lived in Denver. He was charming at first, attentive. I thought I was lucky. She took a shaky breath. I was wrong. Yates said nothing, just listened. It started with small criticisms, the way I dressed, how I kept house. Then it became worse. He would rage over nothing, break things, threaten me. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it might change him, make him better, but it made him worse. He said the child was not his, that I had shamed him, that he would kill us both rather than raise another man's bastard. Yates felt cold rage settling in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral, not wanting to frighten her. I ran, Beatrice continued. 6 months pregnant, I took what little money I could hide away and I ran. I'd heard about opportunities out west, thought maybe I could disappear into a small town, start over. I made it to Cheyenne, then bought passage on a wagon heading toward Montana, but the weather turned bad and we got stuck in Weaverville. She laughed bitterly. I was staying in a boarding house trying to decide what to do next when my labor started. It was too early. I was scared. The woman who ran the boarding house, she said she would fetch the doctor, but then Robert arrived. He found you, Yates said, his voice hard. He found me. Started making a scene in the street, yelling about his unfaithful wife, demanding I come back to Denver with him. I knew if I went, I would never leave alive. So I ran again. Right in the middle of labor, I ran. There was a man with a horse outside the general store. I stole it. Just climbed on and rode north into the mountains into that storm because anything was better than going back to Robert. She looked at Yates with those sage green eyes that had seen too much suffering. The horse threw me about 3 miles in. I think I spooked it when a contraction hit. I do not remember much after that. Just pain and cold and knowing I had to keep the baby warm. I wrapped him in everything I could, pressed him against my skin, and then I just walked. I do not even remember the direction. I was not thinking anymore, just surviving. You are incredibly brave, Yates said, and meant it with his whole heart. I am incredibly stupid. I almost killed my son with my running. You saved his life and yours. If you had stayed with that man, he would have murdered you both. Yates reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. You are safe here, Beatrice. Your husband does not know where you are. The blizzard covered your tracks. As far as anyone in Weaverville knows, you died in that storm. Until spring, she said quietly, when the snows melt, and I need to go somewhere, face the world. We will figure that out when spring comes, Yates said. Right now, you just need to heal. Over the following weeks, as January turned to February and the mountain remained locked in winter, Yates and Beatrice settled into an unexpected harmony. She was smart and capable, insisting on helping with cabin work as soon as she could stand for more than a few minutes. She cooked meals that were far better than anything Yates had managed on his own, mended his worn clothes, organized his chaotic supplies. He, in turn, taught her about the ranch, showed her how to milk Bessie, explained his plans for the spring calving season. Samuel thrived under their combined care. The baby gained weight, grew stronger, began to focus his eyes on the world around him. Yates found himself enchanted by the child in ways he had not expected. He would sit by the fire in the evenings holding Samuel while Beatrice mended or read from one of his few books and feel a contentment he had not known since Frank Morrison died 4 years ago. But it was more than contentment. As the weeks passed, Yates found himself increasingly aware of Beatrice in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. The way she hummed while she worked, the sound of her laugh when Samuel did something particularly adorable, the sight of her hair now clean and brushed, catching the firelight like honey, The graceful movements of her hands, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her spirit that had carried her through impossible circumstances. He was falling in love with her, and he had no idea what to do about it. For her part, Beatrice seemed to be healing in more ways than physical. The haunted look gradually faded from her eyes. She smiled more easily. She started talking about the future in concrete terms, making plans for Samuel's life, dreaming out loud about things she wanted to teach him. She asked Yates questions about his life, his dreams, his thoughts on everything from ranching to religion to the political situation in Washington. They talked late into the nights, their conversations ranging from silly to serious to somewhere in between. One evening in mid-February, with Samuel asleep in his basket and the fire burning low, Beatrice looked at Yates across the cabin and said, "I need to ask you something." "Anything," Yates replied. "Why have you never married? You're kind, hardworking, honorable, you have land and prospects. Surely there are women in Weaverville who would be interested." Yates was quiet for a long moment. "I was engaged once," he finally said. 4 years ago. Her name was Catherine. She was beautiful, educated, from a good family in town. I thought I was the luckiest man alive when she agreed to marry me. What happened? She came to visit the ranch one day in spring, saw how I really lived. The isolation, the hard work, the simple cabin with no luxuries. She realized I was not going to make her rich, that this life meant sacrifice and difficulty. She broke it off that same evening. He stirred the fire absently. Told me she had expected more from life than to be a rancher's wife stuck on a mountain. "She was a fool," Beatrice said fiercely. "This life you have built is beautiful." Yates looked at her in surprise. "Beautiful? It is isolated and difficult, and half the time I am covered in mud or worse." "It is honest," Beatrice said. "You work with your hands to build something real. You care for your animals, your land. You are not trying to be something you are not. After years of living with a man who was all polish and charm on the surface and rot underneath, I find that incredibly beautiful." The way she looked at him when she said it made Yates's heart beat faster. He set down the poker he had been using on the fire and turned to face her fully. "Beatrice, I need to tell you something." She waited, her expression open and trusting in a way that made his chest ache. "These past weeks, having you and Samuel here, it has been the happiest I have been since Frank died. Maybe the happiest I have ever been." He took a deep breath. "I understand you have been through hell. I understand you probably do not want to think about any man that way for a long time, maybe ever. But I need you to know that I have feelings for you. Strong feelings. And when spring comes, I do not want you to leave." Beatrice stood up slowly, crossing the small space between them until she was standing directly in front of his chair. "Yates," she said softly, "I have feelings for you too. I have tried to convince myself it is just gratitude, just the natural attachment to someone who saved my life. But it is more than that. I see the way you are with Samuel, so gentle and patient. The way you have treated me with respect even when I was at my most vulnerable. The way you talk about your dreams for this ranch, this life. I admire you. I trust you." She paused. "I am falling in love with you." Yates stood up, bringing them face to face. "But?" he asked gently, sensing her hesitation. "But I am terrified," she admitted. "Robert destroyed my ability to trust. Even now, even knowing you are nothing like him, I am afraid of being hurt again, afraid of making another mistake, afraid that what I feel is not real because I am still broken inside." "You are not broken," Yates said firmly. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "You are healing. That is different. And I will wait as long as you need. If you need months, years, forever, I will wait, because you are worth waiting for, both of you." Tears slipped down Beatrice's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I do not want to wait," she whispered. "I have spent too much of my life being afraid." Robert does not get to control me anymore. Even from a distance, I choose this, I choose you, I choose happiness. When Yates kissed her, it was soft and gentle and full of promise. Beatrice melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly safe, truly wanted, truly home. They broke apart after a moment, both breathing heavily, and Yates pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me," he said. "When you are ready, when the time is right, marry me. Be my wife. Let me be Samuel's father. Build this life with me." "Yes," Beatrice said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, absolutely, yes." They talked until the fire burned down to embers, making plans for their future. Yates explained that legally, her marriage to Robert would be an issue, but since Robert believed her dead, they could claim she was a widow. It was not entirely honest, but given the circumstances, Yates felt the lie was justified. They would wait until spring, let Beatrice recover fully, and let Samuel grow stronger. Then they would go to Weaverville and stand before a preacher as man and wife. March arrived with the first hints of thaw. The snow began to recede from the lower elevations, though the mountains remained white-capped and cold. Yates ventured into town for the first time since finding Beatrice, needing supplies, and wanting to assess whether anyone was asking questions. He returned with news both good and concerning. The good: no one was looking for Beatrice. The general assumption in town was that the pregnant woman who had stolen a horse during the blizzard had died in the storm. Her body simply had not been found yet, but would probably turn up when the spring melt was complete. Her husband had stayed in town for a week after the storm, searching, then had returned to Denver with a story about his poor mad wife who had run off in a fit of insanity brought on by pregnancy. The concerning Robert Harlan had posted a reward for information leading to the discovery of his wife's body. He wanted, he claimed, to give her a proper burial, but the size of the reward and the description of his behavior while in town made Yates suspect there was more to it. The man wanted to be certain she was actually dead. "He will never find me here," Beatrice said when Yates told her. "And even if he did, I am not the same woman who ran from him. I am stronger now." "We will make sure it never comes to that," Yates promised. As the weather improved, they made plans for the wedding. It would be small, just them and whatever preacher was available in Weaverville, with Samuel as their witness. Beatrice had no family to speak of, her parents long dead, and her only sister living somewhere back east. Yates had no family either except the community of ranchers who were his neighbors, and they lived too far away to bother for what would be a simple ceremony. In early April, with wildflowers just beginning to push through the remaining snow, they rode into Weaverville together. Samuel, now 3 months old and thriving, was bundled against Beatrice's chest. Yates rode beside her on his bay gelding, dressed in his best clothes, which admittedly were not very fine but were clean and mended. And the preacher, Reverend Thomas, was happy to perform the ceremony with no questions asked beyond the basics. Yates introduced Beatrice as a widow from Ohio who had been staying with his widowed aunt over the winter and whom he had courted during those months. The lie came easily, protecting them both. The Reverend seemed to sense there was more to the story, but had the good grace not to pry. They stood in the small church as spring sunlight streamed through the windows and exchanged vows that meant everything. Yates promised to love, honor, and protect Beatrice and Samuel for as long as he lived. Beatrice promised to be a faithful, loving wife and to build a life with Yates that honored the second chance they had both been given. When Yates slipped a simple gold band onto Beatrice's finger, she cried, and when she kissed him as his wife for the first time, he felt like the luckiest man in Wyoming. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town to pick up supplies. Yates was inside talking to the clerk when Beatrice, waiting outside with Samuel, heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "Excuse me, miss, I am looking for someone." She turned slowly to find herself face to face with a man she had never seen before, but who had the unmistakable look of a hired investigator, well-dressed, sharp-eyed, clearly not a local. "I do not know if I can help," Beatrice said carefully, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "I am looking for information about a woman named Beatrice Harlan. She went missing during the blizzard in January, stole a horse, and rode north into the storm. Her husband is desperate to find out what happened to her, to give her a proper burial if she passed. The man pulled out a photograph. This is her. Have you seen anyone matching this description? Beatrice looked at the photograph of herself taken nearly a year ago in Denver when she still smiled freely and had not yet learned what her husband truly was. The woman in that photo looked like a stranger. I am sorry, she said. I have not seen anyone like that. I've only been in Weaverville since March, staying with my husband's family while he finished building our cabin, but I will ask around if you like. The investigator studied her for a long moment. Beatrice forced herself to meet his eyes calmly, channeling every ounce of strength she possessed. Finally, he nodded. I appreciate it. If you hear anything, there is a reward. $500 for information leading to the discovery of Mrs. Harlan's body or whereabouts. That is very generous, Beatrice said. Her husband must love her very much. Something flickered in the investigator's expression. Between you and me, miss, I'm not so sure it is love motivating him. But it is not my place to judge. I just do the job. Yates emerged from the store at that moment, his arms full of supplies. He took one look at Beatrice's pale face and the stranger beside her and immediately moved to her side. Everything all right here? Fine, Beatrice said quickly. This gentleman was just asking about a missing woman. I told him I had not seen her. Yates looked at the investigator with barely concealed suspicion. You are not from around here. Just passing through following up on a case. Name is Walter Green. I work for a firm out of Denver. He tipped his hat. I will let you folks get on with your day. Thank you for your time, miss. They watched him walk away, disappearing into the hotel across the street. Yates immediately began loading their supplies onto the horses. We need to leave, now. He did not recognize me, Beatrice said, but her voice shook slightly. Maybe not, but I do not want to take chances. Yates helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse. They left Weaverville at a steady pace, not running but not dawdling either. Once they were well clear of town, riding through the mountain passes toward home, Yates said, Did he believe you? I think so. But Yates, he said something strange. He said he did not think Robert's motivation was love. He implied there was something else going on. Money, probably. If you are dead, he probably inherits whatever assets you had, or maybe he just wants to make sure you can never testify against him if anyone ever investigates how he treated you. Beatrice held Samuel closer, feeling the solid weight of her son against her chest, the gold band new on her finger. I am not going back, she said firmly. Whatever he wants, whatever he is looking for, he will not find it. Beatrice Harlan died in that blizzard. I am Beatrice Sullivan now, a rancher's wife, a mother, a survivor. And you are safe, Yates added. I will make sure of it. Over the next few months, they settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Yates had worried that the transition might be difficult, that Beatrice's past trauma might resurface, but instead she seemed to blossom. She took to ranch life with enthusiasm, learning to care for the cattle, managing the vegetable garden she planted as soon as the ground thawed, even helping with the spring calving despite Yates's protests that it was too difficult and messy. I gave birth in a blizzard, she reminded him with a laugh. I think I can handle a calf being born. Samuel grew rapidly, hitting every milestone with enthusiasm. He smiled, then laughed, then began to babble. Yates was utterly devoted to the boy, spending hours playing with him, teaching him to grab at things, talking to him about the ranch and the cattle and everything else, as if the infant understood every word. You are a wonderful father, Beatrice told him one evening, watching Yates hold Samuel up to see the sunset through the cabin window. He is an easy child to love, Yates replied, but what he meant was you are both easy to love, and Beatrice knew it. Their marriage was everything Beatrice had not known was possible. Yates was patient, gentle, endlessly considerate of her needs and feelings. When they made love for the first time weeks after the wedding, he took his time, making sure she felt safe and wanted every moment. The contrast to her first marriage was so stark it made her weep afterward, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing that this was what it was supposed to be. Partnership, tenderness, mutual respect and desire. "I love you," she told him in the darkness afterward, wrapped in his arms. "I did not think I could ever feel this way about anyone, but I love you so completely it scares me." "Do not be scared," Yates murmured against her hair. "I am not going anywhere. This is forever, Beatrice. You, me, Samuel, this family we are building, forever." By summer, the ranch was thriving. The cattle were healthy, the garden was producing more vegetables than they could eat alone, and Yates had started making plans to expand his herd in the fall. Beatrice proved to have a knack for the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records and negotiating with buyers in Weaverville with a skill that impressed even the most hardened merchants. They went to town regularly now, and Beatrice no longer felt afraid. She had changed enough in appearance and demeanor that even if Robert himself appeared, she doubted he would recognize the confident, sun-bronzed woman she had become. Her hair was longer, often braided simply down her back. Her hands were calloused from work. Her body was stronger, leaner, shaped by physical labor rather than corsets and confinement. She walked differently, talked differently, laughed differently. The investigator did not return. By August, Yates learned through casual conversation at the general store that Walter Green had concluded his investigation months ago, reporting that Beatrice Harlan had almost certainly perished in the January blizzard, and her body had likely been consumed by wildlife or buried in a snowslide that would not be discovered for years, if ever. Robert had accepted this conclusion and moved on with his life, remarrying by June to a young woman from a wealthy Denver family. "He has a new victim," Beatrice said when Yates told her. Her face was sad but not surprised. "I hope she gets out before it is too late." "You could report what he did to you," Yates suggested carefully. "Now that he thinks you are dead, there might be a way to expose him without putting yourself at risk." Beatrice considered this seriously before shaking her head. "No one would believe me. A dead woman's testimony from beyond the grave? He would claim it was fraud. Someone impersonating his late wife for money or revenge, and it would put us at risk, put Samuel at risk. I will not do that to our family." She took Yates's hand. "Besides, my energy is better spent building something good than tearing down something rotten. He will face consequences eventually, if not in this life, then the next. I have to believe that." Yates pulled her close, marveling at her strength. "You are an incredible woman, Beatrice Sullivan." "I am a lucky woman," she corrected. "Lucky you found me in that storm. Lucky you were the kind of man who stopped to help. Lucky you fell in love with me." "The luck was all mine," Yates said, and kissed her thoroughly. That fall, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. The news filled her with complicated emotions, joy at the thought of another child, of giving Samuel a sibling, fear that this pregnancy might be like the last, ending in terror and near death, anxiety about reliving the trauma. Yates sensed her complicated feelings immediately. "We will do this right this time," he promised. "Doctor visits, proper care, and I will be with you every step of the way. You will not face this alone." True to his word, Yates accompanied her to every appointment with the doctor in Weaverville. Dr. Morrison, no relation to the Frank Morrison who had raised Yates, was a competent, if gruff man who examined Beatrice thoroughly and declared her in excellent health. "The trauma you experienced with your first birth, those are not inevitable," he told her. "You are stronger now, better nourished, and you have support. I expect this pregnancy to be completely normal." And it was. Beatrice bloomed through the fall and winter, her body handling the pregnancy with ease this time. She continued to work on the ranch, though Yates fussed constantly about her not overdoing it. Samuel, now nearly a year old and walking unsteadily, was fascinated by his mother's growing belly, patting it constantly and babbling questions they pretended to understand. In March, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Beatrice went into labor on a warm spring evening. This time, there was no blizzard, no terror, no desperate isolation. Yates rode to fetch Dr. Morrison while Beatrice labored in their bed, attended by Mrs. Chen, a neighbor from 5 miles south who had delivered dozens of babies in her years as a midwife before her husband started his ranch. The labor was long, but progressing normally. Mrs. Chen kept up a steady stream of encouragement and practical advice while Beatrice breathed through contractions. When Yates returned with the doctor, he immediately took his place at Beatrice's side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring words of love and encouragement. "You are doing beautifully," he told her. "So strong, so brave. I love you so much." "I love you too," she gasped between contractions, "even though I am currently reconsidering the whole having your babies thing." Yates laughed, which made her laugh, which made the next contraction slightly easier to bear. Their daughter was born just after midnight, emerging into the world with a furious cry that announced her personality immediately. She had Yates's dark hair and Beatrice's green eyes, and she was perfect. "What should we name her?" Yates asked, cradling his newborn daughter with such tenderness that Beatrice fell in love with him all over again. "Grace," Beatrice said immediately, "because of what you gave me. A second chance, the grace to start over." "Grace Sullivan," Yates said, testing the name. "It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect." He leaned over to kiss Beatrice softly. "Thank you for this. For her, for Samuel, for this life. Thank you." Samuel was brought in to meet his sister once everything was cleaned up and Beatrice was settled. The toddler was fascinated by the tiny baby, reaching out to touch her hand with surprising gentleness. "Baby," he said clearly, one of his few words. "My baby." "Your sister," Beatrice corrected with a smile. "You have to help take care of her." "Help," Samuel agreed seriously, nodding. Over the next few years, life on the Sullivan Ranch continued to grow and flourish. The cattle herd expanded until Yates had to hire seasonal help during roundups. The cabin was expanded with 2 additional rooms, a proper bedroom for the parents and a nursery for the children. Beatrice started selling her excess vegetables and preserves in town, developing a reputation for quality that had customers placing orders months in advance. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, determined to learn everything about ranching. Grace was equally energetic but more mischievous, constantly getting into trouble that made her parents laugh even as they tried to instill discipline. In the summer of 1888, Yates and Beatrice celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary by taking a rare trip without the children, leaving Samuel and Grace with Mrs. Chen for 2 days while they traveled to a beautiful spot in the mountains that Yates had discovered years ago. They camped under the stars, made love in the open air, and talked about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the ranch," Yates said, lying on his back with Beatrice curled against his side. "Maybe buy the property to our east when old Henderson retires. Build something really substantial that we can pass down to Samuel and Grace someday." "I want to start a school," Beatrice said. "There are enough families in the area now that we could justify it. Teach the children reading, writing, mathematics. Give them opportunities we did not have." "You would be an amazing teacher," Yates said, "though I am selfishly glad you have been teaching me instead. I can actually read full books now thanks to you." Beatrice propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Do you know what I want most, though? More than the school or the ranch or anything else?" "What?" "More moments like this, more years together, more memories with you and our children. That is all I really need to be happy." Yates pulled her down for a kiss. "You have me. Forever. Until the day I die. And probably beyond that, because I cannot imagine any afterlife worth existing in that does not have you in it." They returned home to find Samuel and Grace had been perfect angels, according to Mrs. Chen, which they suspected was a charitable exaggeration but appreciated nonetheless. Life resumed its normal rhythm of work, family, love, and laughter. In the fall of 1889, tragedy struck when Dr. Morrison died suddenly of a heart attack. The town of Weaverville mourned the loss of their only doctor and scrambled to find a replacement. A young doctor named Stevens arrived within weeks, fresh from medical school back east, and eager to start his practice on the frontier. Doctor? Stevens was making house calls to introduce himself to the community when he stopped at the Sullivan Ranch in October. Beatrice welcomed him warmly, offered him lunch, and chatted amiably about the area while Yates was out checking the cattle. It was only when Dr. Stevens was leaving that he paused and said, "Mrs. Sullivan, I have to ask, have we met before? You look incredibly familiar, but I cannot place where." Beatrice felt ice slide down her spine, but kept her expression politely curious. "I do not think so, Doctor. I'm originally from Ohio, but I have been here in Wyoming for years now. Perhaps I just have a common face." "Perhaps," Dr. Stevens said, but he still looked puzzled. "Well, it was lovely to meet you regardless. Please let me know if your family needs anything." After he left, Beatrice sat down heavily at the table, her mind racing. Had Dr. Stevens known her in Denver somehow? Or was this just a coincidence, a case of her resembling someone else? When Yates returned, she told him about the conversation. He frowned, clearly concerned. "Do you think he could connect you to Beatrice Harlan?" "I do not know. I do not remember ever seeing him in Denver, but that does not mean he was not there. And if he knew Robert or saw me with him." She did not finish the sentence. "We should be careful," Yates decided. "Limit our trips to town for a while, see if he says anything to anyone else." For several weeks they were cautious, but nothing came of it. Dr. Stevens never mentioned the resemblance again, and life returned to normal. Beatrice eventually decided it had been nothing, just a strange moment of mistaken identity. In the spring of 1890, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant for the third time. This pregnancy was as easy as Grace's had been, and in December she gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas after the reverend who had married them. Thomas was a calm, peaceful baby, who rarely cried and seemed content to simply observe the chaos of his older siblings with patient interest. "3 children," Yates said wonderingly, holding Thomas while Samuel and Grace played a rowdy game by the fire. "When I think about where we started, what we have built, it amazes me." "You amaze me," Beatrice said, coming to stand beside him. "Every day. The way you love us, provide for us, make us laugh. You are everything I never knew I needed." Their life was not without challenges: harsh winters, sick cattle, difficult customers, the endless physical labor of ranch life, but they faced everything together, their partnership strengthening with each passing year. They taught their children to work hard, be honest, show compassion. They built a life rooted in the values of respect, love, and mutual support. In the summer of 1893, when Samuel was 6 and starting to help seriously with ranch work, he asked Beatrice a question that she had been dreading but knew would come eventually. "Mama, why do I not look like Papa? Grace and Thomas have his dark hair, but I am blonde like you, and my eyes are different too." Beatrice exchanged a glance with Yates, who nodded encouragingly. They had discussed this conversation many times, preparing for the moment when Samuel was old enough to notice and ask. "Come here, sweetheart," Beatrice said, sitting down and pulling Samuel onto her lap, even though he was almost too big for it. "I need to tell you something important, something true. Papa is not your father by blood, but he is your father in every way that matters." Samuel frowned, processing this. "I do not understand." "I was married to another man before I met Papa," Beatrice explained carefully. "That man was not kind. He hurt me, and when I found out I was going to have you, I ran away to keep us both safe. I ended up lost in a terrible blizzard, and that is when Papa found us. He saved our lives, took care of us, and fell in love with us. He chose to be your father, Samuel. He chose you." "What happened to the other man?" Samuel asked, his young face serious. "He thinks we died in that blizzard, and we did, in a way. The people we were before Papa found us, we left those people behind and became new. We became Sullivans, a family." Samuel looked over at Yates, who had been watching the conversation quietly. "Papa? Is that true?" "Every word," Yates said, coming over to kneel beside them. "The day I found you and your mother in the snow, it was the best day of my life. Not because it was easy or fun, but because it gave me you. gave me the chance to be your father, and I have been grateful for that every single day since. Do you love me less because I am not your real son? Samuel asked, his voice small. Samuel, look at me, Yates said firmly. When the boy met his eyes, Yates continued, You are my real son. Blood does not make a family. Love does. I love you just as much as I love Grace and Thomas, just as much as I love your mother. You are mine and I am yours, and that will never change no matter what. Samuel thought about this for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. I am glad you found us in the blizzard, Papa. Me too, son. Me too. As Samuel ran off to play, seemingly satisfied with the explanation, Beatrice leaned into Yates with relief. That went better than I feared. He's a smart boy, a good boy. We raised him right, Yates said, and he knows he is loved. That is what matters. Over the years that followed, Samuel occasionally asked more questions about his biological father, and Beatrice answered them honestly, but without going into traumatic detail. She explained that some people were broken inside, that hurt people sometimes hurt others, and that the best thing she ever did was leave that situation and find her way to a better life. Samuel seemed to understand and accept this, secure in the love of the family he had. By 1895, the Sullivan Ranch was one of the most successful in the area. Yates had expanded the herd to nearly 500 head of cattle, had built a proper barn and several outbuildings, and employed 3 full-time ranch hands. Beatrice had indeed started a small school, teaching 8 children from neighboring ranches 3 days a week in a building Yates had constructed specifically for that purpose. Grace, at 7 years old, was already declaring her intention to be a rancher like her father. Thomas, at 5, was quieter, but showed signs of his mother's intellectual curiosity, constantly asking questions about how things worked and why. That fall, a stranger arrived in Weaverville asking questions about the Sullivan Ranch. Yates learned about it from the postmaster, who mentioned that an older gentleman from Denver had been inquiring about newcomers to the area in the late 1880s, specifically anyone who might have arrived around January or February of 1887. Yates felt his blood run cold. He thanked the postmaster casually and rode home immediately to tell Beatrice. After all these years, she said, her face pale. Why now? I do not know. But we need to be prepared. Yates paced the cabin restlessly. The children are older now. We have built a real life here. I will not let anyone threaten that. The stranger turned out to be a lawyer named Harrison, and he arrived at the Sullivan Ranch on a crisp October afternoon. Yates met him outside, deliberately positioning himself between the lawyer and the cabin where Beatrice was teaching the children their letters. Mr. Sullivan, my name is Edmund Harrison. I am a lawyer from Denver, and I'm hoping you can help me with a delicate matter. I am listening, Yates said, his voice carefully neutral. I am trying to settle an estate. My client, Robert Harlan, died 6 months ago. In going through his affairs, I discovered some irregularities regarding his first wife, Beatrice, who supposedly died in a blizzard near here in early 1887. Mr. Harlan received a life insurance payout after her death was legally declared, but I have reason to believe that death may have been falsely reported. Yates felt his heart hammering but kept his expression calm. That is a serious accusation. What makes you think that? Several things. First, no body was ever recovered, which is not uncommon in blizzard deaths but is convenient. Second, the investigator who confirmed the death, Walter Green, was later found to have falsified reports in other cases. Third, and most damning, I found evidence that Mr. Harlan was physically abusive toward his wife, and that she had been planning to leave him. Harrison pulled out a folder of documents. I have been tracing anyone who appeared in this area around that time who might match Mrs. Harlan's description. Your wife, sir, moved here from supposedly Ohio in early 1887, married you quickly, and has since lived a quiet life raising your family. I am not here to cause trouble, Mr. Sullivan. I am simply trying to determine the truth so I can settle the estate properly. If Mrs. Harlan is alive, she is entitled to a significant inheritance. Yates was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he said, Wait here." He went into the cabin where Beatrice looked up from the table where she was working with the children. She saw his face and immediately understood something was wrong. "Samuel, Grace, Thomas, go play outside for a bit," she said calmly. Once the children had left, she turned to Yates. "He is here, is he not? Someone from Denver?" "A lawyer. Robert is dead. He is trying to settle the estate, and he suspects you are alive." Beatrice took a deep breath, then straightened her shoulders. "Then I suppose it is time to stop hiding. Robert is dead. He cannot hurt me anymore. And if there is an inheritance, that money could secure our children's future." "Are you sure?" Yates asked. "We can send him away." "Tell him nothing." "I am sure. I am tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of being afraid of a dead man." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, you will be with me. I can face anything with you beside me." Together they went outside to meet Harrison. Beatrice looked at the lawyer directly and said, "I am Beatrice Harlan, or I was. I am Yates Sullivan now, and yes, I survived the blizzard." Harrison let out a long breath. "Thank God. I have been searching for months." He explained that Robert had died of a stroke, and in his will he had left everything to his second wife. However, because his marriage to that wife was predicated on Beatrice being dead, and because the life insurance fraud meant his estate was more complicated than it appeared, Harrison needed to settle accounts properly. "You are entitled to half of Mr. Harlan's assets from the time of your marriage to him, as well as compensation for the life insurance fraud he committed by falsely declaring your death," Harrison explained. "I estimate the total to be around $15,000. Beatrice staggered slightly and Yates caught her elbow. That was an enormous sum, enough to expand the ranch significantly, to secure their children's educations, to live comfortably for years. "There is a catch, however," Harrison continued. "To claim it, you will need to travel to Denver and testify about what happened, about his abuse, about why you ran, about surviving the blizzard. It will become public record. People will know your story." Beatrice looked at Yates, who said, "It is your choice, your past. Whatever you decide, I support you." She thought about it seriously. Will his second wife be harmed by this? Does she have children? No children. And she will still receive a substantial inheritance, just not as large as she expected. She has family money of her own. She will be fine. "Then I will do it," Beatrice decided, "not for the money, though that will help, but because my story deserves to be told. Because maybe if it becomes public record, the next woman who needs to run from a dangerous husband will know she is not alone. That survival is possible." They traveled to Denver in November, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen and the ranch, in the care of their most trusted employee. The legal proceedings took 3 weeks, during which Beatrice testified in detail about Robert's abuse, her escape, and the aftermath. It was emotionally exhausting, but Yates was there for every moment, a steady presence in the courtroom. The judge ruled in Beatrice's favor, awarding her not just the $15,000 Harrison had estimated, but an additional $5,000 in punitive damages for the fraud Robert had committed. The second Mrs. Harlan, who turned out to be a rather vapid young woman more interested in fashion than finance, seemed more relieved than angry that the ordeal was over. On their last day in Denver, before returning home to Wyoming, Beatrice asked Yates to take her to the spot where she had lived with Robert. The building was still there, though someone else occupied their old apartment now. She stood on the street looking up at it and said, "I am not afraid anymore. Of this place, of those memories, of anything. He made me feel small and weak and worthless, but I was never those things. I was always strong. I just did not know it yet." "You are the strongest person I have ever known," Yates said, pulling her close, "and I am so proud of you." They returned to Wyoming in time for Christmas, greeted by 3 excited children who had missed them desperately and wanted to hear every detail of the big city. Samuel, now 9, was old enough to understand the significance of what his mother had done, and he told her he was proud of her. With the inheritance money, Yates and Beatrice made careful decisions. They purchased the Henderson property Yates had always wanted, expanding their ranch substantially. They set aside funds for all 3 children's educations, determined that they would have opportunities that neither parent had enjoyed. They improved the school building and bought books for Beatrice's students, and they saved a substantial amount as security against hard times. But the money, while helpful, was not what mattered most. What mattered was the freedom it represented. The final severing of ties to Beatrice's painful past, the ability to move forward with nothing hanging over them, no secrets, no fears. As the years passed, the Sullivan family continued to thrive. Samuel grew into a capable young man who worked the ranch alongside his father with pride. Grace, true to her childhood declaration, became a skilled horsewoman and rancher, shocking some of the more traditional neighbors, but earning respect through sheer competence. Thomas pursued education, eventually attending college in Laramie and becoming a teacher like his mother. In 1905, at the age of 43, Beatrice sat on the porch of her home, now a substantial ranch house that had been expanded multiple times over the years. Yates, at 49, sat beside her, his hand clasped in hers as they watched the sun set over the mountains that had been their home for nearly 2 decades. "Do you ever think about that day?" Beatrice asked. "When you found me in the snow?" "Every day," Yates admitted. "Not because it was traumatic, but because it was the beginning, the start of everything that matters to me." "I was so lost," Beatrice said softly, "so broken. I truly believed I was going to die in that storm, and I was almost okay with it as long as Samuel survived. I could not imagine a future, could not see past the next moment, and then you appeared, like something out of a dream, and everything changed." "You saved yourself," Yates said firmly. "I just provided shelter. You did the hard work of healing, of learning to trust again, of building this life." "We built it together," Beatrice corrected, "every part of it. This ranch, our family, the love we share, together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear Samuel calling instructions to the ranch hands as they brought the cattle in for the night. Grace was in the barn, tending to a mare who was about to foal. Thomas was inside, reading by lamplight, preparing lessons for the school term starting next week. "If you could go back," Yates asked, "knowing everything that would happen, would you change anything?" Beatrice thought about this seriously. The abuse, the terror, the desperate flight through the blizzard, the pain of giving birth alone in the snow. All of it had been horrific, but it had led her here, to this porch, this man, this life. "No," she said finally, "because changing any of it might mean not ending up here, not having you or our children or this beautiful life we have made. The pain was real, but so is the joy, and the joy is so much bigger." Yates lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Beatrice Sullivan. Have since the moment I saw you fighting to survive in that storm. Will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Beatrice said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "My savior, my partner, my home." As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, they remained on the porch, 2 people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Their love story had started with desperation and survival, but it had grown into something rich and deep and permanent, a testament to the power of second chances and the healing that comes from being truly seen and valued. Inside the house, laughter echoed as Grace came in from the barn and started teasing Thomas about his serious demeanor. Samuel joined them, still smelling of horses and hay, and the 3 siblings fell into the easy banter of people who had grown up secure in love and family. Yates and Beatrice could hear them through the open window and smiled at each other. This was their legacy. Not just the successful ranch or the money in the bank or the respect they had earned in the community. It was this, the sound of their children's laughter, the warmth of family, the knowledge that they had created a place of safety and love where there had once been only fear and pain. "Do you think they know how lucky they are?" Beatrice asked. "I think they know they are loved," Yates replied. "That is more important than lucky." As the evening deepened and the mountain air grew cool, they finally went inside to join their family. Beatrice started preparing supper while Yates helped Thomas set the table. Samuel regaled them with stories from the day's work. Grace sketched a picture of the pregnant mare, her artistic talent evident even in the quick drawing. They ate together, all 5 of them crowded around the table that Yates had built with his own hands 18 years ago. They talked and laughed and made plans for the coming week. They were a family, bound not just by blood but by choice, by love, by the determination to build something good and lasting. Later, after the children had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Yates and Beatrice stood in their bedroom preparing for sleep. Beatrice caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at her was 43, with lines around her eyes and silver threading through her blonde hair. Her hands were rough from work. Her body had carried 3 children and bore the marks of labor and time, but her eyes were bright. Her smile was genuine. She looked happy and healthy and whole. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I'm thinking about that young woman who stole a horse and rode into a blizzard with no plan except survival," Beatrice said. "I'm thinking about how terrified she was, how broken, how certain that there was no future worth living for." She turned in his arms to face him. "I wish I could go back and tell her that everything would be okay, that she would find you and love and a home, that her son would grow up strong and happy, that she would have more children, a successful business, a life beyond anything she could imagine in that moment of despair." "She knew," Yates said softly. "Deep down, she knew. That is why she kept fighting. That is why she did not give up even when giving up would have been easier. Some part of her understood that the future was worth surviving for, even if she could not see it yet." Beatrice kissed him then, a kiss that held 18 years of gratitude and love and partnership. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for saving us, for loving us, for building this life with me. Thank you for everything." "Thank you for letting me," Yates replied, "for trusting me, for choosing me, for being the most remarkable woman I have ever known." They climbed into bed, into the comfortable space they had shared for so many years, and held each other as they drifted toward sleep. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the pines, a sound that had once been terrifying to Beatrice, but now was just the familiar lullaby of home. The blizzard that had nearly killed her had instead brought her to exactly where she needed to be. The tracks she had left in the snow, half frozen and desperate, had led Yates to her and her to him, and together they had created something neither could have built alone. As Beatrice fell asleep in her husband's arms, warm and safe and loved, she thought about fate and chance and the mysterious ways that life unfolds. She thought about how the worst day of her life had become the doorway to the best days of her life. She thought about how love, real love, had the power to heal wounds that seemed mortal and to build hope from ashes. And she was grateful. Grateful for the blizzard, for the pain, for the journey that had brought her here, because here, in this bed, in this house, on this ranch, with this man and these children, she had found something she never expected to find. She had found home. She had found herself. She had found love that would last forever. And that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was worth every difficult step that had brought her to this moment, worth the fear and the pain and the desperate flight through the snow. Worth everything. Because in the end, she had not just survived, she had lived, truly, fully, joyfully lived. And she would continue to live, with Yates by her side for all the years to come, building on the foundation they had created together, loving and being loved in return, proof that even the most broken beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. The story that had started with a woman alone in a blizzard, dying in the snow with her newborn son, had become a story of family, of healing, of love that conquered fear. It had become the story of Yates and Beatrice Sullivan, a cowboy who followed tracks in the snow and a woman who refused to give up, Two souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a life together that honored both their pain and their hope. It was a story with a happy ending, the kind that lasts not just until the final page but continues on year after year, generation after generation, a legacy of love that would outlive them both and touch countless lives in ways they could never fully know. And if that was not a miracle, Beatrice thought in her final moments before sleep, then she did not know what was.